Hello and welcome to the Surgical Spirit podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Haidar Al-Hakim, the Third Eye Doctor. Pull up a chair and get ready for some candid and uncompromising discussion with experts, innovators, agitators, and influential people from every corner of health and well-being. From inside the hospital to at home in the kitchen, we're leaving no stone unturned in our quest to uncover the secrets of healthier, happier, more successful, and less stressful lives. Thank you so much for joining us, and without further ado, let's meet this episode's guest. Hello Namir, how are you?
I'm very well, Haidar. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I mean, I've been trying to get you for many months, and you're a busy guy, and you travel a lot, and your family live in London, and you're based in Oslo, and you spend a lot of time there. How do you sort of work that one out? How do you work and live in two different places?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still figuring it out. But and it took a little, so I started in August last year, and it took a little while to work out a good rhythm. But the idea was to work and be out in Oslo a few days a week, maybe 2 to 3 times, 3 days a week, and then work from home the rest of the time. And the intention was to actually strike maybe a good balance that way in being out here for some time and being at home and working from home and being around the family. So as you know, I have 3 young kids, so being around the family when it matters in the times where I'm working from home. So it took a little while to work it out, and obviously I was I was at the sort of expense of BA and other airlines in terms of the flight schedules, and often they would be late, which would throw my schedule out. But when I figured out a good sort of timetable for being out here, one that was a bit more predictable for me in terms of when I'm present here and when I'm present at home, it's kind of settled reasonably well. So and now nowadays global commuting is more and more common. It's made more and more it's enabled by technology, Skype and so on. And the stage of the organization is a very young organization. It's kind of conducive to that type of working. So a few of us are doing this in the company at the management level, where we're traveling into the office and in the office a few days a week. So it works well.
I mean, sometime you said August, that's like 7 months now, 7-8 months for things to kind of, you find your rhythm, so to speak.
Yeah, it took I would say the first few months, and then it sort of settled after the first 3 to 4 months, working out different timings of coming out and being here and being at home. And so after the first 3 or 4 months, really, it settled, and now I have a fairly routine timetable of when I'm here, which needs to be flexible, of course, because sometimes last minute I may need to be out there for various meetings. But in the main, it's fairly predictable.
I mean, does the flexibility have to come from the company or yourself, or both?
Both, really.
Yeah.
I'm reasonably, I can be quite flexible, and the company is flexible also. It really comes from both.
Where do you find you're most productive? At home, or in between, or at work, or?
Yeah, it took some time actually to be productive in the airport. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of kind of needing to be aware of where you need to be. But again, I found some good places there to settle down and do a bit of work. I would say, I could be reasonably productive. What do I need to be productive? Really, I tend to work best in quieter spaces where I can really focus. So that exists in the office, and that exists at home, in my home office. It depends on what I need to do. Sometimes being productive means needing to interact with others in the team and have the conversations and evolve the thinking collectively, in which case I would need to be here. Sometimes productive means actually deep diving into an area and really sort of dismantling it and understanding it and putting forward a position around it, in which case a quieter space, again, in the office here or at home. So I'm fairly flexible. I need certain ingredients to be productive, and it depends on what the task is. But those ingredients exist, wherever.
So that's quite interesting. Sorry. I was going to say it's very interesting because you sort of talk about productivity being an internal state of mind, an internal way of thinking, rather than an external thing.
You could say that. It's almost for me. It depends on what it is that I'm needing to be productive on, or what impact I'm wanting to make. But there is a large element of bringing your own sort of internal aspects to it and applying that, regardless of the environment. So I also feel productive when I'm on the plane and reading a book, for example. And that was also, part of as I was considering this role, I tried to consider the various aspects, all the way from the environmental impact of me traveling compared to what I was doing prior to that, which was driving an hour and a half or so each way to my place of work, through to work-life balance, through to my own personal growth. And so part of the growth journey for me was to create more time to read more. And so one of the strategies I had there was that, that could be done, for example, on the plane. It could be done while I'm out here in Oslo in the evenings. And that's actually worked out quite well. So I feel productive in that time as well, in that space where I'm reading. And it could be reading about various things, whether it's around sort of helping to parent, or all the way through to, other things.
What are your 3 most sort of significant books that have changed your life profoundly over the last sort of 7 months that you've been working in this new role?
Yeah, so I like, so there's a book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. I thought that was a good read. It was a great sort of rendition of the growth that occurs through obstacles, kind of a bit of a historical perspective of those in history that have been through obstacles, some of which we've known and we've heard and maybe read clips on, but it was a nice compilation, and again, quite an easy read. One of the others that I'm going through, which I think, I've read a number of his books, Yuval Harari, 21 Lessons in the 21st Century, is an interesting read. And it can be, so, I'm a religious man, so it can be quite provocative. He's quite a staunch atheist, and, it's an interesting viewpoint. But the aspects that are very interesting to me are around the way technology is moving and the impact on society. And one of the main themes, and I said this recently to some high school kids where I gave a presentation, my son's school. And one of the messages was around, and you'll resonate to this, was around change. And his one of the key core themes of the book is that we are living in an age now, unlike any time in history, where we cannot predict what jobs will exist in 10, 20, 30 years from now, unlike the Industrial Revolution, Agricultural Revolution. And he suggests that, maybe children would actually be justified to a certain extent not listening to parents in that regard, because it's difficult for them to predict what jobs will exist in the future. And so what he says was, there are a couple of things to, what do you do about that then? And so a couple of themes he brings out was emotional resilience. And the second is adaptability, the ability to learn and adapt to the environment, because it may mean there may be a demand, and we're seeing this already, for people to change tact, change career paths every 5 to 10 years, because that's the way the jobs are moving. And so this notion of adaptability, this notion of actually training oneself to be comfortable with change, faced with this massive, the massive innovations and the technological advances that we're facing with right now, I thought it's a simple but quite a fascinating sort of piece and the kind of core theme of the book. So that's another one that's been interesting one to read. And the other that I picked up, and I kind of pick this up every so often, is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just find it, it's quite a good. I find it a nice. It's quite a grounding sort of piece of reading, and there's just timeless wisdom in there that you can, every page you read, every sort of paragraph you come across has so much meaning to it, and it's expressed in different ways by different people. He's got this idea of happiness, reaching happiness being, quite a simple, quote unquote, simple path, not easy, but a simple path, and it's very much around how you think and what you think, which drives that sort of sense of happiness. So anyway, so he never kind of ceases to amaze arouse my kind of curiosity whenever I read it time and time again. So maybe those three. Yeah, there are a few others as well, but those are interesting ones.
And it's very interesting that you bring the topic of religion, and given that you're a very scientific man, how did you get into science, and how do you marry it together with your religious beliefs? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question, but I could take it down to sort of the fundamentals, and for me, what that means. How I got into science was when you are growing up and you want to make impact and help, let's say, however we define help, but in the way that I defined help was to help people. You tend to gravitate, and if you've got a curiosity for the workings of the human body, you tend to gravitate towards medicine. And I did that, and that was my first sort of interest, and that was my first real sort of proactivity where I applied to medicine, and I didn't get in, and there were various reasons for that, partly administrative as well. So the question for me was, what do I do next? And so I was faced with going into university through clearing. And so what I knew was that I enjoyed science and understanding how the body works, and that I wanted to help people. And so I ended up in a course called biotechnology, which was 2 years running, actually, at UCL. So I did that. I didn't know where it would take me. And this is where, I like Steve Jobs' quote, where he says, don't try to connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. You have to trust in the journey. I had no clue where it would take me, but I didn't know what I'll do afterwards, whether I'd further myself academically or do a second degree. I didn't make that decision or choice. So I embarked on it. I started, I moved through it, and then I did a sandwich placement at GSK at the time, GlaxoSmithKline. And that's what aroused my curiosity in doing a PhD. And so it's interesting because truly for me, I feel I can connect the dots looking backwards very well, which was almost impossible, if not impossible, for me to do at that time. And so I did the sandwich placement, decided to do a PhD then, and then did a PhD in T-cell immunology, T-cell biology at Oxford afterwards. And then I moved on to, just to finish that off, I then moved on to went back to GSK. And the way I describe it, I learned to professionally research and develop drugs, and then moved to a smaller organization to use T cells as therapies, essentially, which is connecting the dot to my PhD. And now have moved into even smaller organization, again, where we use T cell receptors, where we use T cells to treat patients. So in actually avoiding a part of human biology, which is the immune system, during my degree, because I did avoid it, I didn't really like it too much, so I avoided those modules, to moving deeply into it in my PhD, because I felt a curiosity for it then, and then using the immune system, so learning about the drug development process in a professional environment at GSK, and then using the immune system as a therapy feels for me a complete circle. So that's how I moved into science, and constantly reconciling that with my beliefs. And I guess fundamentally, when I go deeper and deeper into scientific mechanisms and the interdependencies that occur, it's just so awe-inspiring that I can't fathom myself. Others may do, but I can't fathom myself how this has come to be by chance. A simple, or simple is not the right word, a fairly a mechanism that we take for granted that occurs every second in our body, which is T cells scanning the cells in our body to see if there are any foreign agents that the T cells, that the normal cells looking for, also the T cells looking for disease cells, surveying our body, looking for disease cells that occurs moment to moment. And having the ability to quite literally make a decision between life and death, where the T cells either trigger or not against those disease cells, rightly or wrongly, occurs in our bodies, thousands and thousands of times a day. And the intricate mechanisms by which that occurs, and the fact that we live for so long and are able to, and the body is able to quite literally every day be able to detect disease cells, some of them precancerous, some of them cancerous that haven't emerged and aren't observable by imaging. For that to occur and have evolved in a way that is probabilistic, or in the absence of a creator, for me is difficult to reconcile. So that's where I start, is at the beginning, which is, how do I feel about a creator? And the more I delve into the science, the more awe-inspiring it is, the more I lean towards that belief that it couldn't have happened by chance. And then subsequently it becomes what story feels compelling out of the various stories about the creator being in existence. And that's where I lean to my own sort of religious beliefs. But I always start there.
And do you find that there is a kind of conflict, or is there a kind of rivalry when you're in that scientific environment and the concept of religion comes up, or it doesn't come up?
It comes up. Sometimes it comes up. Sometimes it doesn't come up, and I don't feel it to be a conflict myself. I reconcile. In my own mind, I can reconcile any apparent, controversial aspects, and I'm very comfortable with reconciling those things. And as I say,
where does that come from? Being able to sort of take all these different conflicting concepts and contradictory concepts and be able to reconcile with them all.
Yeah, maybe there's a degree of flexibility in the thinking. Maybe perhaps that there's an element of that. Perhaps there's also an element of being comfortable with uncertainty. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty that we know much more than we've ever known, but there's still so much more that we don't know. So being comfortable with that level of uncertainty, and just I think being open to hear the various possibilities, and doing that respectfully. I think I think that's critical. Kind of the age-old wisdom: treat others how you'd like to be treated. And I think avoiding any sort of arrogance in one's own opinion. Which is
very interesting, because you're very, you're an expert in building teams, and you sort of mention all of the different qualities of how to build great teams. Could you sort of elaborate a bit more about what makes you build such great teams around you?
Yeah, really, it's about people. So there are various innovative ways of thinking about organization. So Frederick Laloux published a book called Reinventing Organizations, and his thesis essentially rests on three things. One is what's called wholeness, and this is the idea of bringing one's complete self to an organization. And that is, so removing the facade, bringing one's complete self. If one is coming into an organization, coming in the morning and they're frustrated, then feeling very comfortable to be frustrated. There's also another term for it, psychological safety, which Google had this, they did a survey of teams in their organization, and they looked for the makeup of teams that were the most impactful, the most powerful. They called it Project Aristotle. Aristotle says that the collective is more powerful than the single, and so they called it Project Aristotle, and they went on to this task, and they found actually more than the phenotype of teams, so introvertedness, extrovertedness, more than the expertise of teams, what was most powerful and most impactful is whether a team felt psychologically safe, i.e. they could feel vulnerable and feel comfortable to be vulnerable. So wholeness is a part of that, and that was one pillar and one of the kind of three elements. The other is purpose, and being very clear about the purpose. The why, as it were. Simon Sinek talks about why, right? The golden circle. Why we're doing something is a great motivator, and you can endure anyhow, as it were, as Nietzsche says. So the why is very important, and purpose is very important, and being very, very clear about that, and having that, we're lucky in our field in some ways because the why is very clear. We're here to generate therapies to help patients live longer with a higher quality of life. That's a very clear why. So we're privileged in that regard. And then the other is called self-management. So this is not empowerment, this is self-management, which is this notion of being able to sense and respond. So not going through a series of hierarchy in order to make a decision, a bit like the body. One part of the body can respond to an injury in the absence of another part of the body realizing that. But the power of the body is its independent ability in these microenvironments to do that, to sense and respond. And so this idea of sensing and responding as well, and building that in teams, so giving them the confidence to be able to make those decisions, and then as a leader serving them. So it's a kind of a service-based leadership and I resonate to those three things. And those were the kind of themes that we had, that I'd used previously to help build teams, is around those themes. So being clear on the purpose, encouraging the trust in the teams to be vulnerable and be whole, so the wholeness, and then the self-management, so sensing and responding.
Wow, that's really powerful. When was the first time you felt you were in a great team, in your experience?
I would say that probably when I moved to, so I was amongst great people at GSK. I guess where I felt most profoundly that I was amongst a team where the line of sight was so visible was when I started my journey in a small biotech. When I first started that, so now I'm even in a smaller biotech, but when I first started that was in my last role at Immunology, and I joined and I was the 41st employee, so it was a small organization. The line of sight to clinical translation was very clear, and I joined at a time where we were just about to embark on the clinical trial, so testing the first type of these therapies in patients with skin cancer. And so it felt like we were all moving in the same direction, and that direction was so clear and tangible. When you're in a large organization, you can be amongst, and I was amongst some very talented people, the line of sight is perhaps less clear into clinical translation. And ultimately, the motivation you get from the day-to-day data is fulfilling. But also, translational scientists in the end want to see what impact they have on patients. And so that's, I think, the movement to Immunology in that small organization where that line of sight was clear, I would say, and the talented people in that group to try to make that happen was probably where I most profoundly felt like I was amongst a great team and a great leader. So the chief scientific officer there, Bent Jacobsen, had kind of imbued his leadership style and culture on the organization, which was very much around everyone has a voice. and all voices are equal, and to encourage people to voice their opinion, to speak, and encourage that diversity. And it was a diverse organization, and that's, again, the richness of the team came from that diversity. It's a bit like the immune system. The immune system works well when it's diverse, when diverse mechanisms come into action, and so that the diversity brings some richness. So I think that was the point, and that was back in 2009.
Wow. And given that you're a very active man and you're in science and you love exercise, if we can end with your 3 top tips to diversifying your immune system.
3 top tips: eat well, and there's a lot of sort of background to those 2 words, but eat well. Eat well.
What do you mean by that? I mean, eat well means we can all eat well.
That we can all eat well, and that's why I say there's a lot of that needs qualification. So a balanced diet. I've recently completely cut out processed sugar as much as possible, and there's so much information now about what eat well means, and I think a lot of that is true. Not necessarily the kind of the fad diets, but it's more around balance in the diet. It's more around
balance rather than restriction.
Absolutely nutritious foods. Having foods that provide the energy rather than sap energy. So that kind of thing. I tend to, I enjoy eating a lot of nuts. I try to incorporate berries. I try and incorporate some of these kind of flax seeds, that kind of thing, into my diet as well. So eating well, eating a balanced diet. There's an interesting book called How Not to Die, and the author has the top 12, the Daily Dozen. And it's a good rendition of the scientific basis for what eat well could mean. So that's one kind of reading if people are interested. The other is exercise. I think daily exercise, for me, that's been something that's been just inspiring in the true sense of the word, which in Latin is providing and giving energy, and that gives me energy. Some people say, well, exercise, that could drain you, but I find the opposite. That gives me energy to deal with life and family and so on. So exercise is the second. And the third, I would say, is and none of this is groundbreaking, but the third, I would say, is be curious and read and learn. And I enjoy reading diverse things. I enjoy reading poetry. I enjoy reading science. I enjoy reading history a lot. I enjoy so diversification, because that also brings creativity, and that's, I think, important for fulfillment. So eating well, as I say, the exercise, and also reading and being curious.
Dr. Namir, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. How can people get hold of you if they want to tap into that sort of head of immense wisdom and grounding?
I'm not sure about the immense wisdom, but they can certainly get hold of me through LinkedIn. Happy to help where I can. So that's probably the best way to connect. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Namir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thanks for listening to this installment of the Surgical Spirit podcast. For all the latest in the world of surgical spirit, don't forget to follow on Twitter at The Third Eye Doc, and catch me on Facebook at the page The Third Eye Doctor. You can visit the website at www.thethirdeyedoctor.co.uk for more information on the work that I do. And please send us feedback and questions and suggestions for the podcast. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. I've been Dr. Haidar Al-Hakim, and I'll see you next time.